It's Qualcomm and it's Apple, and it's worth a story right now because in a filing with the Superior Court of California last night, Qualcomm has unveiled explosive charges against Apple for stealing, quote, vast swaths of its confidential information and trade secrets for the purpose of improving the performance of chipsets provided by Qualcomm competitor Intel. Now, these allegations are contained in a complaint that Qualcomm hopes the court will amend to its existing lawsuit against Apple for breaching the so-called master software agreement that Apple signed when it became a customer of Qualcomm's earlier this decade. The two companies, of course, have been embroiled in direct and indirect litigation around the globe, centered on Apple's unwillingness to have its suppliers pay Qualcomm royalties it deems excessive for the iPhone. And yesterday's filing can certainly be seen as the latest salvo in that dispute, designed to put pressure on Apple to settle. But Qualcomm's general counsel, Donald Rosenberg, tells me this case stands on its own and would have been filed regardless of the ongoing dispute between the two companies, saying, quote, unlawful use of Qualcomm's valuable trade secrets to try to help a competitor catch up irreparably harms us and must not be allowed to continue. Now, the new charges are part of a separate lawsuit that was filed last November, in which it was alleged that Apple was in violation of the agreement it signed with Qualcomm when it began work to use Qualcomm's chips in the iPhone. That agreement required Apple to allow Qualcomm to periodically ensure that the source code software and the tools it was sharing with Apple as part of the agreement were being appropriately protected. Qualcomm argues it was being prevented from auditing Apple's use of its source code and tools and the like, and sued. Now it is alleging a far larger misdeed, the stealing of that same source code and tools for the express purpose of helping Intel overcome engineering flaws in its chips that led to their poor performance in iPhones. In its complaint, Qualcomm says it is making the latest charges after discovery in the current lawsuit allowed it to unearth evidence that Apple engineers repeatedly provided source code and other confidential information to Intel engineers so that they can improve the performance of Intel's chipsets. Qualcomm does not provide direct evidence to support the allegations, but it does make reference to back and forth between Apple and Intel engineers that I am told are based on correspondence between those engineers that was found during discovery. Qualcomm is hoping its latest charges will be added to the current lawsuit against Apple and that the case will still be on track for its current court date of April of next year. Now, that remains unclear, as does Apple's response, of course, to these charges, given their timing is not yet allowed for a response from the company. When we get that from Apple, guys, we'll bring it to you. But this does seem to be upping the ante between these two companies, and taken on its own certainly would be considered a very serious charge, saying the largest company in the world has been stealing your trade secrets and giving them to Intel.
Right. But based on a couple of correspondences between engineers?
That apparently the discovery began late on the initial lawsuit about the breach or the lack of audits being allowed. And that discovery, from what I understand, Carl, has turned up evidence, they say, in the form of correspondence that points directly to the charges and the allegations. And that's all they are right now, allegations being made in the lawsuit or in the filing to the lawsuit that we have in our possession.
Jim, thoughts on this? By the way, we should mention today, Ray J cuts Intel back to underperform, having gone to a neutral for a little bit on some strong demand in the first half, Jim.
Well, look, this is Annabelle's Harbors for Intel. Geez, I can't believe it. And that Ray J downgrade is, a lot of it is just basically that the company seems to be in disarray. We know AMD is really taking advantage of it. We know that there is a shortage of CPU chips. But David, I got to tell you, David, I really thought that these companies were closer and closer and closer. I really felt that Malenkov and at the top level, Tim Cook, were about to sit down and make this go away. Wow. I mean, why don't you just lob a grenade into the whole thing? I know that Intel was always trying to get that business. I know that Intel has struggled. I know that Intel was run by Brian Krzanich during this period, presumably. This ups the ante by a level that says don't count on any settlement anytime soon. Explosive is the word.
Yeah, you know, it's hard to know how to view it, Jim, because I do think that there is still a willingness on the part of, certainly of Qualcomm, to try to settle something. But to your point, it does up the ante. Does it actually bring enough pressure? Even though, again, Donald Rosenberg, the company's general counsel, told me, listen, if we had found this out in absentia of anything else going on between us, we still would have brought a complaint. But I do wonder how it plays into the dynamic, Jim, between the two companies. And we should point out, while Intel is mentioned in this complaint, there has been nothing brought against Intel. by Qualcomm. This is purely an action that's being added to the existing action against Apple already.
Well, look, intellectual property theft, the idea that Intel somehow got some trade secrets from Qualcomm, we don't know. As Carl said, it's just some correspondence. But what I don't like is the tone. I mean, I had felt that unless you look, you could threaten to go nuclear. You could say, listen, we have some information that I think is damaging for you and Intel. Or you just put it out there. Putting it out there, I think, changes the whole leverage. I don't see why Tim Cook should ever have to, sit down with these guys if that's the way they want to play it. So,
right.
And those of us who felt that this would be a win-win for both just go into the lose-lose category.